Well, it is a sweaty day outside, but it is time to do a little beekeeping. Gotta get that smoker going good and hot. We're doing some inspections today. So it is a super sunny day. It's a beautiful day for a little bit of beekeeping, presuming that I don't go too late into the afternoon. But things have dried out a little bit after the rains that we got, maybe 5 or 6 days ago. But that also caused some of the local flowers to open up as we head into the fall. Who knows, maybe we'll get a little bit of a fall flow. I've seen the greenery from the asters along the roadsides starting to pop open, along with a few other flowers from this time of year. Some of the sunflowers are still out. They aren't producing a whole lot right now. But I know that my bees are out doing whatever they're supposed to do, because I have one hive that always has a bit of bearding on it, and there's no bearding on it this morning, which means those girls are out doing what they need to do. So that should make things go a little cleaner in the bee yard here in just a few. So I got my gear and we're about to have a little fun. All right, so just gonna do a little check on these hives to see how their health is going. Each one has a little bit of a different circumstance, but both of these right here on my fence line were started from swarms from last season, or I should say one was a swarm, one was a split. The smaller one here was a split from one of the colonies, and it's been gradually growing. I gave it some more resources when I had that one hive fail out. So this is our first promising sign. See there on the lid, there's some bees walking about. So we got enough population that they're patrolling the top box up here, which is good. This is where I have their frame feeders set up. And I had put some pollen patty up here too. And there was a lot of comb for them to start working to clean out. So I should have had quite a few bees moving up top, which is what I wanted to see. Yep. Good activity in here. Just doing a spot check, make sure my queen's not on the lid. But nice and orderly. Nobody's super concerned about me. They have completely cleaned out the feeder, so that's good. They've been working with it. I don't expect they'll have done a whole lot in this box. My curiosity mainly is in the middle, but in order for me to get some sort of a sense, I'm gonna have to pull a frame out to loosen this up, because these frame feeders tend to tighten things up quite a bit. Makes it a little harder to grab the frames and pull them out. So I may pinch a bee or two here, unfortunately, but I try not to. All right, so this is a foundation, has just a little bit of comb being drawn on it. It's a little hard to see. You can see some of the dimension maybe. These yellow foundations are a little harder to tell when they're actually getting comb going. But that actually looks like fairly new comb, but it still may be a holdover from some of the spring development. And there are a lot of bees down in the bottom box. Gonna look at a few more of these up top just to see what they're doing with them. Mostly just trying to make sure, because this was my emergency maneuver. I needed to get some of those combs from that failed box into another hive so they could protect the resources so we didn't have pests move in. And these girls seem to be doing a pretty good job of it. It's nice and clean. Okay, so The queen does not appear to have moved up here to do anything because the comb isn't quite that thick, which I am a-okay with that. That keeps the brood nice and tight down at the bottom. And that's where the queen was the last time I checked in here. So put those back where they belong. We'll get this put back in. I give them a little smoke. So this isn't a super packed box of bees, but there's good population in this bottom box. So you can see here, they're all focused on those frames. Lots of nurse bees working down in there, trying to clean stuff up. Looks like these over here might either be storing, it's hard to get the camera to focus with the light out here, but they might either be storing nectar or they may be cleaning some stuff out to get ready for more brood. And then over here, it's a little more sparsely populated, not as many bees. So if I was looking at this and I needed to do a quick little check of the hive, and I wanted to know, is the queen laying? Because that's the most important thing. You can typically tell basically where most of your brood is going to be based on the population of bees. The cluster tends to be around where the new baby bees are forming. So if we're looking at this box, we can see that they're not exactly center in the box. They're more a little off center, about 1 or 2 frames. So right in here is likely where I'm going to find most of my actual brood. So let's dive in and see what we find. It's just an old brood comb. There's nothing really on it that they're doing anything with. Some good weight on that frame. Okay. Well, that's good. So now they got a few queen cups, which is a little funny, but those are just practice cups, so nothing to be worried about there. But I don't see my queen on this frame, but I'm gonna hold the frame up. You can see here we've got some capped brood on there. Now this doesn't look like a tight cluster at first. I can't get the camera to focus down in there, but most of those cells that are in between actually have young larvae of varying sizes. They just look like little commas. So they're working on it. So that's one. I'm just going to take a peek. The next one doesn't look like as much of a brood comb heading this direction. It is mostly food. There's some pollen and there's some honey stored. That's pretty much all that this is. So up toward the top, you can see a little bit of capped honey. That's for them to have. There's some capped or not capped, but prepped pollen, bee bread in there. So this is food resources. So there's another good bit of brood on this frame, which is good to see. And right here is my queen. You can see her. She's the fat bottom girl right there, moving around the frame. She's busy, she's a mover. She moves a little more because she's a young queen. That's normal of these young queens. And I can see that next frame over has a lot of brood on it. So that's good. That's what I wanted to see. I'm gonna get them safely in here because I don't want to damage the queen in any way. So we're being super careful. To keep them moving forward, I'm actually gonna give them some pollen patty. We'll get them back together. Kill that yellow jacket. All right, these girls are looking good. One down. So let's take a look at this next one over. So let's see how this feeder's doing. I usually thump them a little bit and you can tell when they're mostly empty, and this one is completely empty. Okay, so I'll rotate this one down. They took all that sugar that I was feeding them and they stored it away so that they had it to eat. So I'm gonna make a mark after I'm done recording that this one gets rotated down into the box, because we won't extract that if we get any honey this season, this fall season. And this one is the same way. They've been storing that up as emergency food for themselves in some of those combs that were salvaged from that other hive. So that's good to see. We got young larvae, I got eggs, got some capped, not a lot. Okay, they're recapping some cells, which this was one of the things I was curious about. So last week when I was in here, I could see that they had uncapped some of the brood that had been capped, which was a little strange, a little peculiar behavior. I haven't had a colony that's been one to do that, but I've been researching it, and apparently that can be just a hygienic behavior where they're uncapping, getting rid of varroa mites that are inside the colony, and then recapping the brood, which I find that fascinating that they would actually open cells, clean it out, and then recap the cells. But it looks pretty tidy in here now, whereas I didn't see that behavior last week. Now, it is a little strange that they're being quite this moody, because that's not typical of this hive. Oh, and there's my queen. She's crawling around this bottom corner. She's a hider. I caught a glimpse of her. She's moving around pretty quick in that bottom corner. I don't want to keep her waving out and about. She's a darker queen. I haven't seen her in a while. Seeing good behavior here though. Now those hiding queens, sometimes that can affect the behavior or mood of the bees too. Mama doesn't want to be disturbed. The genetics of the bees are inclined to not want to be disturbed. There she is. She's moving around right there at that corner over here. And she's moving pretty fast too. Where'd she go? She running in circles? Yep. She's staying right in that corner edge. She's right there on that empty part on the frame, the wood frame, moving back toward the comb. So she's pretty, man. All right, got a good bit of brood on here. I got another frame of brood right beside it, so she's a layer. She's also another young queen. So we're gonna get these girls back inside and get things back together, because we've seen everything we need to see. So that's 2 down. One thing I do want to talk about a little bit here is when I started keeping bees, one of the trickiest things that you get into is you see all these beekeepers on YouTube and it's like, man, they keep finding their queens. How do they find their queens so easily? And the first probably 6 months that I was doing beekeeping, I had fits finding my queens. And I used all the tips that they would talk about. The first one is basically look, of course, for where the cluster is in the box, and then go to the middle of the cluster without putting too much smoke and pull out that frame and see if there are eggs on it. And if there are eggs on it, chances are your queen is there. If there's young brood on it, meaning the uncapped, they look like little commas inside the frame, then chances are your queen's on it. But they tell you when you pull it up, look quickly at the sides of the frames inside the box that you're leaving behind, because the queen will often run to one of those frames. But that's not really practical, because you can't really see with the shadows down in there well enough to tell where your queen is. So that never worked for me. So the thing is now, I would say 9 times out of 10, if I'm looking for my queen in a box, I can spot her without any problem. And here's what it comes down to for me. You pull a frame out, you look at it. Is there eggs? Are there young larvae? If there are, what is the behavior of the rest of the bees? And I'm not talking about the stuff that they talk about on YouTube with people, or with bees chasing the queen or whatever. It's not so much a movement pattern. But what I have found in almost every colony that I own is that the bees on that frame where the queen is located tend to have this extra jitter to their movement. And that extra jitter triggers in my brain, the queen is probably on here. So I pause a little bit longer with that frame that I'm looking at, and almost all the time I find the queen. Now obviously that jitter sometimes will be there if the queen did, as I was pulling it up, jump to one of the side frames. But normally, if I don't find her on that frame, and I've done a pretty good job kind of just quick doing a skim, if I pull up the frame right next to it that has the most brood on it, she's gonna be right there on the side of that frame. So I've gotten pretty good at finding queens, and as you saw here, because we saw both of our queens in both of these colonies, and I wasn't trying super hard to look for them. So it is one of those things that if you get into beekeeping, you're new to it, you feel a little discouraged because you just can't spot the queen, give it time. Kind of store away these mental cues. The more time you spend with your bees watching and learning, the more likely you are to be able to just kind of spot some of those little behavior quirks about them. Now, for whatever reason, this box of bees is really ticky. So maybe they've been fighting off some pests. It could also be because they've been trying to clean out those frames I donated to them from that other salvaged colony of resources. But there we go. We're gonna move on to the next one. I'm out at Humphrey Harbor. Showed you a couple of the hives out at the home yard. And now I've got a couple of hives to take a look at out here. Front behavior looks pretty good. So good activity. Just saw a couple of bees with some pollen on their legs go in. So that's promising here. And then similar behavior over here. Already got a bee landing on this side of my camera, but there's another girl landing right here in a second that has some pollen on her legs. There she goes, right in the entrance. So that's promising. Showed you the inspections at the house, so now I'm about to do a couple of checks out here. These colonies, and what I've found so far this season, is that all of the colonies that were doing super strong back for the spring season are needing a bit of TLC at this point in the season. And all the ones that were basically nukes or startups in the spring are coming on pretty strong right now. So we'll see what that means for the fall honey flow, if there is one. Just to give you a little look down in here. So when I talk about a frame feeder, I can't see my screen, but you'll see there's a feeder right here, still has some sugar syrup, and I've got some sticks down in there, and the bees just kind of go down, drink the syrup, come back up. And then if I come over here, maybe you can see some of that white wax that's down in there if the camera's focusing. So when you see white wax, generally that means that they are making new wax, which is good to see. Especially these colonies are kind of young, they need to build some resources up. I don't need to do a whole lot in here. Main thing I want to do is make sure that they're growing and that the queen is going to start trying to make some new bees. We look at this one, we'll actually see there's a mix of brood. There's some honey at the top. There's actually, it's a little harder to see in there, but there's some yellow bee bread that's filling spots. So it's kind of an odd jumble of a frame. They've got food, plus I see some young larvae, super young larvae actually. Some capped brood, so that's older larvae. Lots of capped brood. And then kind of right there in the middle, you can see, actually I can see it in the camera, some of the larvae, the little milky white larvae that you see down in some of those cells. Got that on both sides. So right down here in this little groove, see her big butt right there poking out now? That's my queen. All right. Well, she's doing a good job. Lots of brood. This frame's about to be packed out. So, and I can tell there's more brood on this next frame, so I'm not going to disturb them any more than I already have. That is all that I needed to see. So we're going to gently get them back together. Throw a little bit of pollen sub on here. Okay. Good brood. These two were both nukes in the spring, so these queens are both young queens. So they've still stored plenty of pollen. I see a little bit of waggle dancing going on. And that's a waggle dance without pollen, which means she's probably signaling that either she found water or she found nectar. So I don't see my queen, she's a hider, but I see signs of my queen. All right, so I'm gonna do a little bit of a wrap up here at the end. This time of year, still limited resources. We have started to see more flowers and stuff open up. It's right here at the end of August, beginning of September. Hopefully in another week or so, we'll see an actual fall nectar flow of some sort open up. But we are having to feed the bees a little bit, try and keep them moving forward. These two were both nukes, meaning they were small 5-frame colonies at the start. Actually at the end of spring, because they came from either swarms or a split from one of my other colonies. Moved them into these boxes. They're doing healthy. Mites are under control. I did, however, still just do mite treatments just to make sure. We've been feeding them. They're doing great. The queens are both laying, no real disruption. Most nukes, when you start them, you don't really expect honey the first year. So we're really just using them for resources, build the colonies, get good, strong queens that hopefully next spring, if they overwinter well, then those are genetics we want to keep in the bee yard. We'll split the colonies, use those queens or those nukes somewhere else, and grow our operation a little bit incrementally at a time. So anyway, they're doing fantastic out here by the lake. And honestly, these two are probably 2 of the strongest of the 10 colonies that I have. All of the strongest colonies I have at this point in the season are actually ones that started from nukes, and they're kind of slowly growing up. The ones that are needing a little bit of work and triage are the ones that were really, really big. And then we ran into that big summer dearth without much rain. It was completely dry. So that's where we stand. I appreciate you watching these videos, keeping track with MacBeeBuzzin, and we'll try and make more as we kind of wind down this season, and then maybe try and do a little bit more early spring if we see that people actually want to watch them. So if you enjoy these, leave us a note in the comments. We appreciate you, and keep your eye out for more honey next spring.